Hello everyone, my name is Victorino Perez. Thank you for tuning in into my recital. The last half of my recital is a presentation over the many uses of improvisation in a piano lesson, especially if our students want to learn how to improvise or have curiosity for improvisation. We will discuss the following: history of improvisation, the benefits of improvisation, and what resources are available for us to teach improvisation to our students. First, let's explore the historical context of improvisation. Improvisation was used before the 1600s. Western European music was maintained by rote learning after the breakdown of the Greco-Roman civilization. New music, on the other hand, was worked out in performance or improvised. The knowledge of this music is limited due to the imposition notation of liturgical chants, what makes it difficult to conclude improvisational techniques. The surviving evidence of improvisation is the melismalic flourishes on the last syllable of certain alleluias of the early liturgy. Another way of improvising was through an ensemble. Treatises contain information on how a singer could add another line to chant while being performed. Some manuscripts of the 12th century seem to have written down improvisation in two or three voice organum. In the 13th century, forms of music like motets, dischant, and others, singers would improvise on a cantus firmus. By the 14th century, improvisation and written music were separated due to the development of music notation, but was still an important factor in music. The practice of improvisation above a chant led to the creation of parallel thirds and sixths in Britain in the late 14th century and early 15th century. Treatises in the 16th century about improvisation were mainly for vocal ensembles. The only book during the 16th century about instrumental ensemble improvisation was Trato de Glosas by Diego Ortiz. This Trato de Glosas used cantus firmus to teach improvisation and contained several improvisation variations that were used in the future. Another type of improvisation was simpler than ensemble improvisation was ornamentation. Performers would embellish long notes in a single line of a composed piece. Usually one voice was embellished in a polyphonic work unless it was a magical or motet, which performers would agree ahead of time what parts to embellish within each voice. Silvestro de Ganassi published the first manual on teaching how to improvise embellishments for vocal and instrumental and string players. Embellishments, also known as improvised diminution, had an influence on composed music that became an essential element of the Baroque style. A genre that was based on improvisation on a perfectly tuned instrument was the prelude. The purpose of the prelude was to establish the mode for the next piece. The characteristics of a prelude were idiomatic virtuosity and rhythmic freedom and loose thematic construction. In the Baroque era, improvisation was used in different ways other than embellishments. One way was through varied reprises. Embellishing the first statement and the repeat was not encouraged. Sometimes the composer would write out the varied reprises for the performer. For the capo aria, varied reprises were required. Another method of improvising during the Baroque era was melodic variation. Performers were able to show their improvisational skills by using distinct characterized variations. Therefore, there are many movements that exist on their own without knowledge of the original sonata that they were integrated with. Free improvisation took form of a cadenza during the Baroque era. Cadenzas were at the end of a concerto movement or aria. Fermata over a 1/6/4 chord was the indicator for cadenzas. Cadenzas were either written out or improvised. There are characteristics that pertain to a real cadenza: placing, cue articulation, and improvisatory character. The general rule was for a cadenza to be played under one breath, whether it was sung or played. Other than cadenzas, improvisation was used in a continuo realization. John David Hitchen wanted to take it a step further with continuo realization. He promoted using chords in both hands and improvised ornamentation. The last type of improvisation in the Baroque era was complete pieces. Improvising on a complete piece was something common during this time period, which performers took virtuosity to a higher level. Some of the famous improvisers were Frescobaldi, Buxtehude, Bach, and Handel. Bach gives the limited freedom for the performer to improvise on BWO 903 and BWV 895. Unlike Bach, Handel gives opportunities for the performer to improvise on organ concertos. Partimento was created during the Baroque period, which had figured bass lines. Partimentos were different from continuos because performers had to improvise on a character piece, which some had titles like toccatas and fugues. In the later part of the Baroque period, partimentos became a pedagogical improvisatory exercises and were replaced with free fantasia. Now, we'll have John Shasteen improvise on a complete piece, Scarlatti L 23. During the classical period, for instrumental music, three types of improvisation were passed on from the Baroque era were embellishments, free fantasies, and cadenzas. There were treatises written for the performance practice of improvised or prepared embellishments. Composers, in some instances, would write out embellishments for students or amateurs since they have not mastered the skill of improvisation. The principal theme would have improvised ornaments and embellishments, mainly in slow movements or rondos. Primary melodic lines, like in piano solos, duo sonata with obbligato instrument, string quartets with a dominant first violin, chamber works for a wind instrument and strings, or concertos would get improvised embellishments by the performers. Solo improvisation during the classical period was mainly led by keyboardists, but a few were experts in it. The final section of CPE's Bach's treatise covers free fantasy. Bach stated clearly that to be successful in this type of improvisation is to have a strong knowledge of harmonic progression and consistent rhythm. Mozart's and Beethoven's concerts included a solo improvisation in which their ability to improvise was recognized. Mozart's fantasias might represent concert improvisation pieces, although mostly metrical. Other than fantasies, there are other ways to display improvisation skills. Spontaneous variations on a given theme were a common type of keyboard improvisation. Improvisational preludes were also common, and it was used to try out on an unfamiliar instrument before a performance or to link pieces in different keys. Some modulation preludes by Mozart still survived, while these preludes are metrical. Piano concertos were another main genre during the classical era. There is evidence that soloists were expected to improvise on orchestral ritornellos of keyboard concertos, whether there was figured or unfigured bass. Published editions of the 18th century usually had figured bass in the keyboard part in the left hand with no obbligato. There's a debate over this practice due to the keyboard's role in concertos. The debate is whether the keyboard's role was to play chords and keep the orchestra together, or that the bass line was used to cue the soloist from getting lost. In the Haydn Sonata third movement I've played, there's an opportunity to do a cadenza improvisation on a fermata. At the beginning of the Romantic era, improvisation was very popular, but mostly extinct after the 1840s. Improvisation was an important factor of the musical culture due to the supremacy of the piano at the beginning of the Romantic era. The piano's virtuosity and expressivity were exploited by the keyboard virtuosos, therefore, they included at least one improvisation in their concert programs. Usually, popular melodies or operatic arias were improvised. Hummel and Liszt improvised themes given by the audience. Chopin improvised polished national themes. Czerny wrote the most important improvisational treatise of that time. Czerny's treatise, Opus 200, was for the more skilled professionals, unlike other treatises by his contemporaries were for amateur musicians. Czerny's treatise clarifies improvisation of preludes, cadenzas, fermatas, and individualistic works, but does not cover their characteristics. Czerny pointed out that through practice and experience, improvisers used a higher refined order plan on their skill. Although improvisation was much freer than written compositions, Czerny stated that improvisation should be structured enough where it made sense and was interesting. He believed that improvising on a single theme was the most difficult type of improvisation, but using different styles in one could be more appealing. A freer fantasy should have more than one theme. Another possibility for improvising on a single theme is with theme and variations. Unlike fantasies, preludes had their function as warm-ups to test instruments and establish appropriate mood. Since preludes were used as introduction pieces, preludes were improvised to link pieces, which was an old practice. After the 1840s, improvisation started to decline due to performers becoming interpreters and separating composition from performance. Another reason was that musical techniques became more melody-oriented than bass. Improvisational styles and procedures were being used in compositions, which led to the decline of improvisation. By the end of the Romantic era, improvisation became part of organ and piano-violin duos. And despite of the trend of the Romantic era, we could still we can still have our students improvise on romantic pieces. Improvisation during the 20th century was linked to functional music like dance and church music. Improvisation took the form of a new style, which was a piano accompaniment for silent films. In silent films, a pianist or organ reed player would improvise piano accompaniments for the silent films. The performer had to rely on their improvisatory skills since they were responsible for the music. Picture theaters grew and filming. Film producers, along with music publishers, created a catalog for music that could be in a film, whether it's pre-existing or recently composed. Jazz, on the other hand, was different. Jazz gives the opportunity of spontaneous surprise, experiment, and discovery for a soloist on their improvisation. Most jazz styles have improvisation incorporated, whether it's a few measures, a chorus, or open solo for many soloists to improvise with accompaniment. Jazz did make an impact that many composers have pieces that were influenced by jazz in the 20th century. Composers did limit the freedom of performers when it came down to versions of the piece or idealistic demands. Recording of composers performing their music displays how much freedom is given to the performer. Now let's talk about the benefits of improvisation. An article by Andrew Landau and Charles Lim, The Neuroscience of Improvisation, explains what goes on our mind when we improvise through a non-invasive neuroimaging. Studies have shown intense deactivations of the cognitive control region of the brain, whether improvisation is loose or restrictive, can affect cognitive control regions. Melodic and rhythmic improvisations without restrictions, high levels of musical freedom and complexity show a wide range of deactivation of the cognitive control in experienced improvisers. Reductions of the cognitive control could be related to flow state. There have been reports of musicians entering flow state when improvising. What does flow state do for us? It decreases self-monitoring, self-consciousness, the anxiety of failure, which helps us musicians connect with the music immediately. There was a study that included self-monitoring and required to reproduce the same improvisation later. It demonstrated higher levels of cognitive control and entering flow state possibility were low. There are reports that musicians experience flow state when playing with others that are the same skill level. A different study showed that musicians enter flow state when they're comfortable in their musical environment, which means cognitive control and skill do not correlate. Parts of the brains that deal with sequential planning and selection have become activated when improvising. It could be active when repeating patterns, specific chords and key changes, shaping and linking musical ideas. This allows for the musician to make the best musical idea during improvisation depending on the style. It was found that focal activation of part of the brain just located above the eyes was active when professional jazz musicians were improvising intense levels of musical freedom with little restrictions. This part of the brain has been related to the creation of inner thoughts, actions, and high goals with the rule of the current task. In a study, it showed this region of the brain being active during improvisation, which supported that improvisation can help with expression and communication, and it can be rewarding through psychological and pedagogical observation. The reason why this part of the brain was not present in other studies could be due to the lack of musical freedom for self-expression. Areas that deal with the creation of the understanding of music and language and interaction were activated during improvisation. There was a study done where musicians would improvise 4 bars from each other. These areas of the brain work together to give the appropriate response to other musicians to create a more meaningful dialogue between musicians. Musicians have stated a strong connection when improvising with others. Using improvisation in a piano lesson will help students with decreased self-monitoring and increased self-expression, increase students' willingness to express individual creativity, decrease students' negative response when a mistake is made, positively affect planning, motivation, attention, cognitive flexibility, abstract reasoning, and fine motor skills, help students connect with their music on a deeper level, allow students to effectively engage students' creative levels, give students lifelong cognitive skills which may be applied both in music and other professions. So how can we teach improvisation to our students? Pattern Play by Forrest Kinley. This series covers a wide range of styles of improvisation. These improvisations include world music, jazz, classical, and pop, scales, modes, 7th, 9th, 13th chords, and others. This series has 6 books in total. Each unit contains a duet, solo, trios, and quartets. For the duets, there's a bass and treble part. Whoever has the bass part plays first while the other one listens before playing. There are two bass lines, pattern and vacation. The bass player starts with the pattern and repeats it until it's memorized. The treble player improvises melody with the recommended scale after hearing the pattern a few times. The bass player alternates between both bass accompaniments whenever it feels appropriate to do so. This would create a musical conversation, making the bass and treble players listen to each other. Varied accompaniments are given to the bass to keep it interesting under variations. For the treble, ideas for creating is given for the treble player to experiment with the given melodic ideas. The solo section is similar to the duet but just for soloing. The trio is similar to the duet but with a middle voice added. Book 3 features a classical and romantic improvisation. One of them is called Nannerl and the other one Chopin. Nannerl covers the classical era and Chopin the romantic era. Now let's hear Ellie and I improv with on Nannerl. Now let's hear the improvisation on Chopin. Now for world music, let's take a lesson on a tango. There are units with the names like regrets, harvest, storm, faded memories, World music and jazz like Spain, Brazil, Caribbean dance. This method is a great way to teach improvisation in different styles, ranging from classical to jazz to Latin jazz, moods and imagery. Pattern play is loose on the improvisational parts, and it involves music theory and many diverse styles. Jazz, jazz rock course, a complete approach to playing both acoustic and electric keyboards by Bert Skanowitz. This method is unique in that it could be played in acoustic or electric piano and focuses on jazz and rock improvisation. This series includes an acoustic and electronic jamming at the bottom of each page. There's an acoustic jamming. The acoustic jamming has the left-hand accompaniment for the teacher or experienced pianist to add on for a duet. On the other hand, electronic jamming has recommended sounds and rhythm backgrounds. In this case, it helps with the style and groove. There are sections of the books called Improv Idea and Improv Performance. It introduces an improvisational concept or reinforces concepts they already learned previously. On the picture on the left, the improv idea is dynamics. There's an explanation for the improvisational idea and instructions for the student to experiment with this concept on the short piece. On the right side, the student is allowed to improvise dynamics throughout the piece, but there's a suggestion for the student to experiment with. The picture on the left, the improvisational idea is repetition with the C blues scale. Only 2 measures are given in each exercise in this picture. On the right, the picture on the right, it only has 4 measures where the student is repeating the motive. This book uses different styles like ballads, boogie woogie, jazz waltz, and more. The concepts for improvisation like blues scales, chord progression, syncopation, passing tones and sequences, and rhythmic alterations. This method is more structured compared to pattern play. Students who prefer a more structural type of improvisation and written music would benefit from it. Creative Composition Toolbox by Wien and Rossi. This series focuses on composition. There are 6 books of total. Each book brings 10 compositional tools for the student to learn. The author designed this series to be taught in private lessons, group lessons, or in camps. This compositional series was meant for students to express themselves through composition. Each compositional technique is introduced in a 2-page format. One page contains an example piece in which the student learns the concept by playing the piece. On the second page, it has a compositional assignment for the student to create their own composition while using the tools that were presented. The series starts with the basics of composition like range, pedal, tempo, and grand staff, to more complex things like lead sheets, quarto and quinto harmonies, and counterpoint. This relates to improvisation because the students that are composing will have to improvise first and see if they like what they hear. The student will have a better idea of how to improvise since they know different compositional techniques and apply them. This series is fairly short compared to the other 2. Apart from these methods, what activities could we do with our students? An article by Valeria Kampmeyer called Intuitive Improvisation, A Guide for Beginners. She writes about 5 games that she has created and used with her students. First duet, it's suggested for the teacher to pick a key and a simple bassline like Canon by Pachelbel to play. The student improvises on that bassline with whole notes until they're comfortable. After that, they can start using quarter notes and eighth notes, then integrating rest. Once the student is confident, they can start combining different rhythms, which leads to the creation of melodies. Therefore, students will learn the process of composition through improvisation and experimenting. Second duet is similar to the first duet, but with the use of modes. The second duet In the second duet, D Dorian and Aeolian are recommended in this game since they are easy modes and all white keys. The teacher plays a drone of fifths, whether it's repeated or a pattern of fifths. Question and answer. This game starts with the teacher playing a 2-bar melody and 3/4 or 4/4, but not ending on the tonic note. The melody gets completed by adding 2 bars from the student ending on the tonic note. Then the teacher and student switch roles, playing the question and answer. Experimenting with different keys, time signatures, rhythmic patterns, and moods is great with this game. Also, the question can end on the tonic note and the answer on a different note. Guess the animal. The the teacher picks the animal and portrays it through the piano. To give hints, the teacher has to keep in mind the animal's size, texture, color, sound, and other characteristics when displaying it through the piano. Once the student guesses the animal, the teacher and student switch roles. It's okay if it does not make sense musically. Now let's hear Ellie and I play this game. A sloth.
Too easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Another one.
Okay, another one? Mm-hmm.
Oh my god. Okay.
Music to picture. The teacher takes a picture and uses it as a basis for improvisation, whether it's from an art book, postcard, calendar, or whatever is available at the moment. The teacher can give the student the freedom to improvise or a little push if the student needs it. If the student needs a little help, the teacher can ask questions about the elements found in the picture. For instance, what colors or textures can be seen? What is the setting of this picture? Is there a story being told? What is the scene of this picture? Th- this game could be done as a duet too. The teacher can play the scenery and the student can play the characters in the picture. The teacher has to be willing to trust themselves and be a child again with this improvisational game. If it becomes eternal, it's fine. This game is great for students to use their imagination to create a musical image. There's a similar game to Campmire's question and answer called Copycat Keys by Olivia Hancock. This game is meant to be utilized in a group class or in a studio where there's more than one keyboard or piano. The principle is the same as using two or four measure improvised melody, but this time the student starts the game. Either another student or teacher replies or mimics the melody or rhythm. What's different about this game compared to Campmeyer's is that there's two variations to it. The first variation is that the student copying the melody has to change one note of the original melody each time they play it back. This will keep the student thinking ahead and focused throughout the activity. The second variation is adding emotions into the mix. Whether the melody or rhythm is original or copied, it must show an emotion. Therefore, if the original is mimicked, the emotion has to be copied too. They can be tweaked too to show a different emotion. Bradley's show Wash, Balancing the Eye and the Ear, You Can Teach Improvisation. This article discusses how to teach improvisation with a written piece. Show Wash suggests that using a short piece that uses 3 or 4 chords in the left hand, Show Wash suggests using a short piece that uses 3 or 4 chords in the left hand. The first step is getting the student to learn the piece exactly as written and using improvisation as a reward for learning the piece. Next, after the student has mastered the piece, have the student analyze the chords. Then the student plays the chords and inversions in their left hand as the teacher plays the roots of the chords as quarter notes. It's important for the teacher to keep the beat and not hesitate when the student is searching for the chords, because it's important to teach the student to make the chord changes in time, particularly for jazz. Once the student can do the chord changes in time, next is adding right hand and using scales. The left hand keeps the same job of playing chords, but the right hand plays a 1-octave scale of the key the piece is in as eighth notes. The teacher supports the student by playing the bass line as written throughout the rest of the exercises. The next step is changes in direction. This time the student is given the freedom to go any direction of the scale, but no skips or leaps, and still using eighth notes. After that, mixing rhythms. The teacher should suggest the student to make a few notes longer. The teacher should avoid restricting to specific note lengths. The final step is adding leaps. Adding leaps is better because the student can you can use any interval they choose instead of restraining them to skips. Once all these steps are done, it's time to put it in context. Get the student to play the A section as written for the first time through. After that, repeat the A section with improvisation, which is a few measures long, from 8 to 16 measures. Then play the B section as written. Overall, there are different ways to teach improvisation. We just have to find the one that fits our teaching style and our students, because every student is different. Improvisation has been part of music history and used throughout various aspects. With improvisation, we're teaching or reinforcing styles or concepts that apply to classical, jazz, or modern music. Our students will not be afraid to improvise if they're asked to do so. Improvisation is a great way to open our students' minds and create their music beyond notes on a page. So it's up to us as teachers to create these well-rounded musicians. Want to know more? Here are the following resources. And thank you for tuning in to my recital.